there is a reaction among a meaningful number of voters that this was more than I signed up for. And I think there is a backlash against it. And I guess we will see whether that is sufficient to prevent him from doing what we saw in LA somewhere else. I don't know the
Ron,
answer. If I had to bet, I think the answer is going to be no, because he's always been someone who worries more about his base than anyone else. But I think you're right that there is a backlash. I'm just less convinced it's going to convince him to change course.
it's very clear from the polling that's happened since the election of President Trump that the public is in large part disturbed by what they're seeing. People want the enforcement of immigration laws, prioritizing people with criminal records beyond the fact that they've come into the country illegally. And I just wonder, ultimately, does this end up washing back on Trump so badly that for immigration hawks who want to see greater enforcement in the long run, this is going to hurt their cause? Of course, they're disrupting thousands of people's lives in the process, but I wonder if in the long run, this hurts their cause.
Well, first, I would say I've been writing about immigration since Prop 187 in California in 94, and writing specifically about public opinion on immigration for over 30 years now. And public opinion on immigration, the political scientists would famously say is thermostatic. It moves in the opposite direction of the incumbent administration. When you have a Democratic administration, the public generally moves toward more hawkish positions. And then when you have a Republican administration, they kind of pull back from that. Having said that, there is a through line. I mean, I've written about polls about immigration for 30 years, and the American public have believed several things at once. They do not consider them contradictory or incompatible. They believe we should be a nation of laws, we should have a border, people should respect the process, and that it is unrealistic to deport 11 million people, many of whom have U.S. citizen children and have long roots in our communities. And you are seeing, I think, that enduring through line of public opinion imprint itself on the reaction to what Trump is doing, because he gets very good marks from a majority of the public will say they approve of what he is doing at the border, that he has got the border under control to a far greater extent than it appeared under Biden. Now, part of that is walking back from our international commitments to provide opportunities for asylum, but leaving that aside, the public viewed what was happening as the border as unacceptably chaotic under Biden. It did hurt Harris and Biden in 24, and they give Trump solid marks for what he is doing there, whether they should or not. They are differentiating between the border and interior enforcement, right? And on interior enforcement, as you suggest, he is facing much bigger backlash, particularly over what was, given, as I said, that one of the through lines of public opinion is that Americans think that people who have been here for a long time, have no criminal record, may have U.S. citizen kids or spouses, deserve an opportunity to stay here. That is what the public is recoiling against. And, it is, and you are seeing, I think, some of the possible 28 Democrats themselves making this distinction between the border and what Trump is doing on the interior. Ruben Gallego in Iowa the other day, Gavin Newsom, and multiple appearances, including this remarkable 4-hour podcast he did with a conservative podcast host, which I listened to the whole thing. Maybe we'll talk about later about him. But I do think the thermostatic effect is kicking in. Now, for Trump.
Hi, I'm Pat Morrison, one of the hosts of America at a Crossroads. If you like this video, don't just watch. Head over to our website where you can subscribe for early access to new programs, see our upcoming schedules, and connect directly with our guests in our weekly live streams. Thank you for watching.
I understand what you're saying, that all these ICE operations, because they instill fear, and it's palpable, front of mind for so many people in Southern California who are affected by this. But that the backlash it's created in other parts of the country, because the other, similar to the thermostatic response you're talking about, is the issue that when it's personal, people's perspectives change. They have a theoretical idea that illegal immigration is bad. There are all these people getting benefits. We're in the United States and we shouldn't be paying. But that's all sort of, the writ large theoretical. When they see families that are ripped apart, when they see, people on their way to school, families are stopped, things like that, I think it creates a very different reaction when you see what those policies mean in practice. So
And
I
I think
wonder if this undermines that federalizing of cities.
I think that's a very reasonable interpretation, Larry, of what we are seeing in public opinion. I mean, for many voters, this is more than they signed up for. Now, it took a willful suspension of disbelief to convince yourself that Trump was really talking only about criminals. He said he would prioritize criminals. He also said, people should not be surprised this is what he is doing, even if they are. Nonetheless, something like 30% of the Latino voters who voted for him said they oppose mass deportation. And people managed because they wanted to vote for Trump for other reasons, primarily because they felt the cost of living was unaffordable. They wanted to convince themselves, they wanted to hear that he was only going to be targeting criminals. And now what they are watching is something very different than that. So, yeah, I do think there is a reaction among a meaningful number of voters that this was more than I signed up for. And I think there is a backlash against it. And I guess we will see whether that is sufficient to prevent him from doing what we saw in LA somewhere else. I don't know the
Ron,
answer. If I had to bet, I think the answer is going to be no, because he's always been someone who worries more about his base than anyone else. But I think you're right that there is a backlash. I'm just less convinced it's going to convince him to change course.
next week, Wednesday, of course, 5 o'clock Pacific time, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and national security expert Alexander Vindman will be in conversation with Madeline Brand. They're going to be talking about Russia and Ukraine. So until next week, from all of us at America at a Crossroads, thank you so much for joining us.